In the previous lesson, we defined a bunch of arrow functions inline that served as our event handlers. Another approach that we can take is assigning those arrow functions to constants before we return any JSX in our functional component. And the advantage there is we can provide some additional context as to what that function represents. It's a very similar idea to what we have in our class-based components. We have these methods right here, and their names provide a little bit more clarity that here, for example, we are handling a form mode change. Here we are handling an email change, etc. So the way this is going to look in our new functional component is we're still going to keep these same functions. We're just going to assign them to constants, and that has to take place before we return any JSX. So for example, right here, what I can do is define a constant called handle mode change and assign that to be this arrow function right here. It is totally valid in JavaScript to assign or declare a function within the body of another function. It's a first-class citizen, and thus we can use it like any other data type. We can declare a number or an array within the body of a function, and we can indeed declare another function, just like we're doing here on line 13. So here we have an uninvoked arrow function called handle mode change. It is a procedure that describes some bit of logic that will run when the function is invoked. And we can say we want to run handle mode change right here when the user presses the switch. So we can simply provide that uninvoked function right here and write in handle mode change. We no longer need to use the this keyword because now this handle mode change arrow function on line 13 exists within the same scope. It is still within the function body right here. It is still within these curly braces. So in our return JSX here, it understands what handle mode change is. That name, that constant exists within this block in JavaScript. So the JSX has no problem understanding what this is referencing. So thus, we no longer need to use the this keyword. We can just reference the arrow function declared right here and given its own constant. So now we can refactor the code below to utilize this approach. It's not necessarily to say that this approach is always better. I just kind of like it because it moves a lot of the logic all to one place of the component. So now we can see, for example, that we have a login mode state value. We have a set login mode setter function to update it, and then we have an additional function right here, which is the one that actually runs that set login mode function at some point. And then at that point, we can look down and understand where in our JSX, where in our actual elements are we using that bit of logic. So the advantage here is that there's a little bit more of a separation between our UI and the actual logic, the JavaScript versus the HTML/JSX. I'm not going to say this is necessarily better. It's just another approach you can see. So with that said, we're going to move through the remainder of our event handler functions. So right here, I have this one right here to set the email. I'm just going to cut it right here, move up top and define a new arrow function. So const handle email change and assign that to what I just got below, which is that. And again, we're defining an arrow function that accepts a parameter called event. At this juncture, when the component runs, it doesn't know what event will be, but it doesn't matter. It's just a function that takes a parameter called event and accesses that assumed object, gets its target property, gets its value property, and passes that value into set email. This function isn't running yet, so it doesn't matter because event doesn't exist yet, but it will exist when we actually when the user actually types a character into the email input, at which point React will generate the event and pass it in here. We are just defining the procedure. We are defining the cooking recipe. We are not actually cooking it just yet. That will take place when the user actually interacts with the input down below. So it's totally fine to declare this function right now, even though we don't have an event object. That's just regular traditional JavaScript, right? We can define a function that takes 3 parameters and without invoking it, and that's totally fine. It's just a function that accepts 3 parameters that's going to utilize. So moving on down, right here where we have on change, we can now reference handle email change from above. We can also copy this one right here, cut it out. Let me in fact define handle password change before I forget. That function does not exist yet, but don't worry, right here we will define const handle password change and paste the code we just cut. Once again, it has the same logic. It accepts an event object and uses that value on it to pass into the set password setter function, which will update the password state value in our component. All right, so I think there's one more, and I think there's one typo here. I have an extra D, but not a problem. That's fixed. And now we have just one more inline arrow function right here for the confirm password piece of state. So cut that. Right here, I'm going to write const handle confirm password change. Paste that. Save that. Let me just make sure Prettier is working. All right, and then scrolling down, I'm just going to reference handle confirm password change. Save that, and there we go. I think Prettier was broken because we had nothing in here, and that was causing a analysis error with the syntax, and thus Prettier couldn't work. But now we can see everything looks fine. All right, so now we've replaced all of our former inline arrow functions with regular arrow functions that are assigned to constants above our actual returned JSX. Totally valid, just another approach that you can take to further separate your JavaScript logic and your state handling logic away from your actual UI elements, the JSX that you return from the function. That's all there is to cover in this lesson, so I will see you in the next one.